Get started here, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to come to the panel discussion for the FSB Real Estate Forum. Really appreciate that. I want to also thank our alumni and executives who've also taken time out of their busy schedules to come from Cleveland and Chicago and Cincinnati and Columbus. We have a number of alumni in the real estate space. When I was on LinkedIn and kind of looking at different people who I was looking to invite, it's pretty extensive on the number of alumni that we have, nationally that are involved in commercial real estate and or lending in different capacities. So my name is Dave Lurk. I'm the Director of Corporate Relations here at the Farmer School of Business. You may have heard me introduce some of our other executives. We've had a few different forums over the past few weeks. This is just the next one in line, but I think a really exciting one. We've had a number of students raise their hands over the past semester to say, I really want to learn more about real estate, more about commercial real estate as an opportunity for internships, for future employment, and so forth. And I would say, of all the different majors that we have, I'd say primarily here at the Farmer School of Business, there may be students here that are in College of Arts and Science and elsewhere. The real estate industry has so much opportunity, and it really does touch every major that we have specifically here at the Farmer School. When you look at marketing, when you look at management, when you look at analytics, which is really becoming big, finance, of course, accounting, economics. So all these different areas I think are really important. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and I might need that one.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Here we go. There we go. But what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and have our executives here go ahead and introduce themselves and give it a little bit about their background, where they currently work, what their current industry experience is, and also maybe a fun fact about your time at Miami and maybe something that you really enjoyed while you're here, what you've missed at this point. So I'll let each of you go ahead and introduce yourselves to start with. I think it's on.
You hear me?
Yep.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Nick Rabin, Senior Vice President at North American Properties. We are headquartered in Cincinnati, but with developments and operations all across the country. I am blown away by the attendance here. Commend all of you. I'm not sure I would have done this in the...
Especially on a nice night like tonight.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, and I'll say it again, I credit Dr. Marshall for sparking a passion in me when I was an undergraduate here in the late 90s. It has really carried me into a career in real estate. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to chatting with you tonight.
I'm Matt Lasky. I graduated 2011 with a finance degree, business analytics minor. I'm a managing partner at Equity Velocity Funds. We're about a $500 million retail and healthcare private equity investor in real estate based out of Columbus, Ohio. I guess fun fact, Miami merger, and again, echo Nick's thoughts, it's pretty bold that you guys aren't on patio somewhere today.
My name's Pam Weber. I majored in finance while I was here, and I too had Dr. Marshall and took every type of real estate class that I could take when I was here. And I was telling him earlier, it made a big difference. It was a differentiator when I came out of school. I graduated in 1990, as much as I hate to admit that. And so a lot of the places that you guys go to have fun don't even exist here anymore. So my fun facts are dated. But I am with PNC Bank. I'm based in Cincinnati. I am a commercial real estate lender. Have spent my entire career with PNC, came off Miami's campus and started in their training program and have been in the real estate sector since. I've done analytics, I've done special projects, I've managed and now do business development and concentrate, have a specialty in urban redevelopment. It's, we all have talked in different formats, and passion is a word that you're going to probably hear several times. Real estate sparks it, and we all have the bug.
Wow. So I'm a little opposite of you. I don't remember too many of my professors from graduating from here, honestly. in 1989 with an accounting degree and a minor in MIS. I work for a company called GBX, which I'm sure most of you haven't heard. 'Cause it's a very niche boutique investment banking firm that focuses on real estate, but it's owned by Drew Brees and his family, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And so I'm very blessed to work for them. A little different than my peers here. I've actually worked at a number of places, both banks such as PNC and Key in their capital markets, but I've also been on Wall Street with Credit Suisse and GMAC, along with some private real estate development companies like the NRP Group. Fun fact for me at Miami, I did a little bit different. I worked at Skippers and Top Deck, and so which are still here. I do split my time between Cleveland and Miami.
Carl Gerdemuller, I'm with Viking Partners in Cincinnati. We are a small private equity investment firm investing primarily in retail and office assets. Prior to that, I was 16 years with Macy's Department Stores, the last 7 as head of corporate real estate for them. And prior to that, I spent 15 years with what is now Simon Property Group in Indianapolis, Indiana. When I first joined them, it was still Melvin Simon and Associates, privately held, and a lot different than what that company has grown into, which I believe is not only the largest retail REIT in the world, but the largest REIT in the world, period. I was here a long time before the rest of this panel was here, as you can see by all the gray hair. I did not have Dr. Marshall because I don't think Dr. Marshall was here then. I actually got my MBA here, and so I was only here for 1 full year, unlike the rest of the panel. My fun fact is I did have the good fortune of being a graduate assistant to a gentleman named Dr. Harold Puff. And Dr. Puff was in the management department, a wonderful old guy, a little bit of an absent-minded professor type to him. But he would typically come to me about 10 minutes before one of his classes would start and say, I got to go someplace. Here's the topic today, go teach the class. Which was exhilarating and incredibly frightening all at the same time, but a wonderful experience.
Well, good. Well, thank you for the intros and a little bit of background on your career paths and so forth. One of the first questions I want to kind of ask our panelists here is that I think many of the students in a lot of the classes you have, a lot of the professors talk about disruption. You hear about disruption in technology, you know, there's disruption with companies like Uber and things of that nature. We've seen some companies specifically in the commercial real estate marketplace that I think touch all the different sectors in different ways. So I'd like for our panelists, and again, this doesn't have to go in order, but how you might look at disruption when you take a look at Airbnb and how that relates to disruption of hotels, or when you take a look at WeWork and how it affects the whole office sector. Another one, of course, the big one, Amazon, and how it relates to the bricks and mortar of retail. And you can give examples, if you want, of different projects that you've worked on where these disruptors are affecting the real estate space, as well as lending, too, on how that looks.
If my panelists don't mind, I actually have this as part of my presentation that I've had twice today to some of you. And so I'll talk specifically about the fact that when I graduated here in 1989, the sectors that in real estate that were the sexiest were basically malls and office, for lack of a better term, were really the sexy. If you weren't in one of those 2 sectors, you really weren't in real estate. And things like multifamily and warehouse industrial, for sure, were considered ugly stepchildren. And where now, if you look at that space, obviously with the likes of FedEx and Amazon and others, they've taken, warehouse space that was worth $2 a square foot, and it's an amazing feat, the turnaround now in the industrial and warehouse space, whereas conversely, obviously the retail malls have been hit very hard. I know where I spend a good amount of my time in Cleveland with DDR, Developers Diversified, big retailer company that owns and develops retail companies has taken a huge hit. And again, other sectors such as multifamily, especially urban multifamily, along with student housing, which really didn't exist as a sector Not that many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, there was no student housing REITs, whereas now it's an entire space within the retail markets.
I can kind of play on this, on that theme as somebody that's been in the retail and the regional mall business now for close to maybe a little over 30 years. I tell people, you've been in this business a long time when you were part of the malls that got developed back in the 80s, and there's the same malls now that are caving in on each other. But it's no question that the retail space has probably been disrupted, maybe more than any other asset class right now. Amazon, among others, has forced retailers to listen more closely to the customer and, for better or worse, spend a ton of money catering to the customer. The customer has said, I want to be able to go online, and I'm going to push a couple of buttons, and I don't want the stuff tomorrow. I want it in the next hour. Okay, maybe I'll give you 2 hours, but that's all you get. It's disrupted the department store space. It's disrupted the apparel space, the grocery space, because it's forced these companies to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars on technology to make this happen, to keep the customer content, at the same time costing them an inordinate amount of money, getting the goods to you, getting the goods to the customer in a timely fashion. So in some ways it's a race to the bottom, but the feeling is that we have got to do this in order to survive. I do think that the retailers who will ultimately be successful are the retailers that will effectively, seamlessly integrate their online business with their brick and mortar business. It can't be one or the other. It's got to be both. The Warby Parkers and the Bonobos of the world, they were really the early adapters in terms of going from a digitally native company to one that integrates brick and mortar. And for every Bonobos and Warby Parker that's out there, there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of retailers who have grown up on the internet, digital only, who are now looking to have a presence in the brick and mortar space. And those are the ones long term that are going to be successful.
Real quick before, does anybody know how Sears and Penney's started? What their real big business was that got them going before they opened up stores? Over here? Catalogs, right? And so we're almost kind of going back to that to some extent. So I don't know if I would call some of this as disruptors. It's more just life cycle. And this stuff happens. It obviously happens in a number of different industries, but I wanted to point out the comparison of Sears and Penney's and catalog to what's happening today. I'm sorry to take away anything there.
I'll talk a little bit with regards to the Airbnb concept. It's interesting. I don't know that we've, in my space, as far as lending goes, the Airbnb has not disrupted the underwriting pattern yet. But what I've found, and maybe Nick, you can kind of speak to this a little bit too, is that what we've found is that a lot of my developers and owners of multifamily are extremely protective of not allowing B&B into their apartment complexes. It causes a safety and security issue, a branding issue, because you don't know who these renters are. I had an example, literally, I thought my developer was going to have a cow, because I had to tell him that one of my credit officers who had come in town, he was doing a visit, that we actually, ironically, it's so funny, we were meeting with this particular client to do a site visit at a project that we did for them, and turns out that something fell apart with regards to my client. We weren't able to pull that off. My credit officer, turns out, didn't miss on the site visit because the Airbnb unit that he was staying in was in my client's property that we were going to site visit, that is strictly prohibited in their lease to do. So I had to tell him that. I had to kind of bust the situation open. But it's definitely something that's created a challenge with regards to it. From our perspective, it hasn't disrupted the financing pattern yet. But as it becomes more and more prevalent, it'll be interesting to see how it flows through. Now, as that relates And it's a very close tie with the hospitality industry in that that's creating probably more of a disruption because we're seeing the hospitality folks being disrupted by them not seeing as many room nights in some cases because somebody can, for a very equal price, can go and have a nice apartment, can have a nice condo, can have a nice home for not that dissimilar of a pricing. And so what they're finding is the mechanism to track that, what we'll call a shadow market, is kind of difficult. And from an underwriting standpoint, from a market research standpoint, those things, trying to get our arms around it and how to track that information is tough as you're making predominantly a hospitality decision. It just, because hospitality, you've got a smaller margin of error for getting your projections and your analysis right than multifamily. There's a little bit more wiggle room from our standpoint. But it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, so we invest in smaller, like community-oriented retail, and Amazon has certainly coined. We have an internal term just called the Amazon test, which is our vernacular of saying, do we think the internet will impact this business at all? And I mean, on every acquisition we do, we're going tenant by tenant, evaluating that. Coincidentally, the other side of our business is medical office buildings and healthcare-related stuff, which one of the mega trends there is healthcare systems are starting to realize they have to treat their what used to be patients like customers and consumers. So they're getting out into the marketplace. They're realizing that waiting an hour in a hospital is a terrible experience for like seeing a primary care doctor, for example. So they're starting to think more like retailers in their strategy and going out into the communities, and in a lot of cases, a retail building envelope. And then another kind of like the catalog trend that was mentioned, there's this ongoing cycle in healthcare where hospital systems buy physicians. The physicians then work for a paycheck and not for themselves. Performance goes down. The hospital gets mad. They get mad. They spin out. And then they repeat every kind of 8 to 10 years. So we're on the tail end of the doctors all moving back out of hospitals when hospitals bought them up kind of in a recession when they wanted steady paychecks.
So my area at North American Properties is multifamily, which is a fancy word for apartment buildings, really. Apartment buildings 10 years ago were essentially a commodity. Very little separation, very little differentiation from one to another. In the 10 years since, there's been almost an arms race of sorts, due in part to the 2008 housing crisis, and due in part to an emerging market of what we refer to as renters by choice, which are oftentimes not young people, empty nesters, and many others. That arms race is reaching the point of unsustainability. During these preceding 10 years, it was, who can find the better location, build the bigger apartment, the better amenities. We're starting to feel some disruption or pullback now in the other direction, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, no, I actually have one question for the multifamily guy, because I'm interested, because we talk about the Amazon test. What is the test that you have within you? I know what my answer would be in multifamily. What would be your answer of the test that you would, if you had a choice of being near any retailer in this day and age with multifamily, what would you choose?
Grocery.
Specifically? Whole Foods, right? Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. You can
Trick question.
Yeah, you can read the stories, but there is actually an entire analysis now that's being done in multifamily regarding how the success of apartments that are nearby a Whole Foods or Trader Joe's in comparison to other multifamily. So it's very interesting. We talk about these different tests that you see if you're underwriting in debt, equity, ownership, whatever it may be, but there's all these little nuances that you look at.
Yeah, and I think where they're kind of talking about right now with multifamily, I'm kind of it kind of leads into the next question, and it kind of really focuses on, all of you college students and student housing, and then as you graduate and want to go off to Chicago or Denver or, Cincinnati or other Midwest locations. One of the areas that I've seen grown significantly has been student housing. And when you take a look at, again, whether it's a race to build the Taj Mahal or it's an arms race with regards to student housing, I know it's flourished over the country. And then, so maybe that piece with regards to student housing today, is it overbuilt on different campuses? Is there still room for that to grow? What are college students looking for as it relates to these new amenities, these packages that might be different than living in an uptown house that you're not so enamored with your landlord in that capacity? So maybe a little bit of picture color on student housing, and then maybe what it looks like when they graduate. What type of multifamily or communities? Is it urban? Is it mixed use with different areas that they're looking for once they graduate, and what you're looking to build?
Go the other way. So student housing has also been an area of our business that's grown exponentially recently. To your question of overbuilt, real estate is ultimately a very local question and a very local business. And there's no doubt that there would be certain college markets that are overbuilt and others that are not. We've built several hundred, now close to 1,000 student housing units, which is very different than beds, right? That would probably be a few thousand beds around the University of Cincinnati. The housing stock in that area, which we studied very closely, was starving for new product. And 1,000 units compared to total enrollment is really a drop in the bucket. So the students would know better than me what they're looking for. I'd be very interested to know. But in terms of overbuilt, it's a local question.
Yeah, I'd say one, we don't do any student housing, so not qualified to speak on that. But kind of post-graduation, when we're looking at development projects with a retail component, these days, if you want to get anything done in like a major urban area and on like a well-known street, you have to go to make sense of the cost to a mixed-use project, which means like from our retail standpoint, we can get that Amazon-proof retail, but cities are almost mandating, or just the cost of the project, you can't make sense of it unless you're building multifamily above it. So we don't like call ourselves a big multifamily owner, but we're starting to get in the mixed use space because we like the retail that comes with it. And you can't get into, the top 25 metros and just build retail downtown that easily anymore. And another trend is cities used to want these big retail parking fields, and because of the internet and some of the trends, they now want less parks and more density, which means something on top of your retail, be it multifamily or office.
From a student housing standpoint, we have worked in a lot of different cases with Nick and North American, not only at the University of Cincinnati, but down at Florida State. And when we, probably in the housing sector, we probably have more market research efforts and more analytical support as it relates to our student housing lending than probably any other of the multifamily sectors. Back to Nick's point, it's very localized. So we not only analyze the dynamics of the project itself, but we also look very much at the statistics around the university in which we are, that we're lending to a project there. We want to understand the dynamics of that particular campus, what their growth trajectory is, what their enrollment pattern has been, what kind of endowment they have. We understand things with regards to alumni following and things like that, because we need to know that if we're investing, if they're investing, is this a project that is going to be sustained, long-term with regards to a campus that's going to survive. There are a lot of campuses out there. There are a lot of increasing tuition dollars that are happening out there. So we are looking at those patterns in terms of what can be sustained. And then two, the bottom line is to build the type of new housing that you guys want to live in. It's resort type living on most campuses. We have to impress you. We have to impress your parents, and that comes with big dollars. So, you guys are already paying high tuition dollars on most campuses, on this campus. And then, if the housing, if the housing gets to the point where in order to deliver the product type that you want to live in, it starts to get to a point where you and your parents are making decisions going, holy moly, this is doubling the cost of education because of the housing. Again, we look at that in terms of the sustainability and the affluency and the ability to pay of the student body that's there, because at some point in time there's going to be a break point where it's just too much. We also look to geographically. The more landlocked a campus is, the better I feel about it, because a lot of new product cannot come in and compete against it, and I don't have to worry about all of a sudden rents starting to drop because 10 other projects went out in the cornfields beyond the campus, knocking rents down. So that's kind of some of the things. Down at Florida State, there was a huge booster support down there within the community. They wanted to change the face of their campus and kind of created almost a corridor and it made a big difference. We looked at that and said, okay, this has backing. This is great. We love this. And the success that they've had down there is pretty tremendous.
So my experience in student housing is investing and raising capital in about 6,000 beds, and I have 2 kids that went through Indiana and Maryland, which, unlike Miami, which is no fault of anybody's, just Oxford, you have a lot of zoning restrictions here. So as a result, the big towers of student housing that you would see elsewhere, you don't have here. So it's hard to make the comparison here, even though I have friends and have invested in student housing in Miami. I mean, my feeling in this space is that it's flawed. I've invested and again raised capital throughout Ohio and Kent State, Akron, OU, again, Miami, down through Texas and Arizona. And there's no one formula that I see that works everywhere. As we noted, demographics are a big issue because parents drive everything. To me, kids have a say, but it's really about the parents. The parents want to spend the money, they will. If there comes a breaking point, the parents make that decision. But the thing that I tend to find is when we would build the most beautiful units in some of these campuses, people didn't want to live there because they want to live in homes. So when you have Miami, which I know from coming here myself, people want to live in houses. They don't want to live in apartments. And so you have a demand for the apartments, but not as much as you would have elsewhere, even though the demographics are there. The other thing about student housing, which is interesting, is that most developers, which I'm sure Nick will attest to, will develop for an exit. Even though people saying that they want to develop and they want to own, they usually want to develop and they want to have the ability to exit a transaction. The student housing space, the ability to exit is rather limited. There's 2-3 REITs that are in that space and some other private buyers, but it's still limited because it's a newer space. So you don't have as many exit opportunities as you would have in a space like multifamily and office and elsewhere. But it's a great space. It is a little bit flawed from the standpoint of underwriting. The fact that you spend $1,000 a bed for a 4-bedroom parity unit, so that's $4,000 a month for a unit that if that was in any other city and was not a student housing deal would probably rent for less than half that. So it's a little bit odd when you look at from the standpoint of cap rates and the rent per square foot. It's pretty ridiculous. But it's something that's here to stay. There's no doubt about that.
Well, Viking does not play in the residential space nor the student housing space, so I'm afraid I don't have a lot to offer. But if I were a student today, I would want a swimming pool and a bocce court.
Well, I think as you heard. Is it on? There we go. No, I think when you listen to some of the stories, especially Mike, with your comment about what you all are paying for student housing, whether it's uptown or in a house or one of the newer student housing projects off 27 or out near the post office, it sounds like per square foot you're paying an exorbitant amount. But that's not, I think, just here at Miami. It's probably at many other colleges across the country. Let's shift a little bit to the capitalization side and/or lending side. So all of you, if you want to kind of touch on maybe the projects or the areas that you're working with your respective companies, how you look to raise capital, whether you go to joint venture partners, whether you're going to institutional investors, pension funds, things of that nature. And I know it's going to vary, but maybe kind of the types of returns that they're looking for on a project or a fund, and how you might deploy that capital and/or lend in that capacity, if that would be an area to start.
Yeah.
You want to, Carl, we want to jump in since we've limited
As
your...
I mentioned earlier, we're a private equity investor. We have a pool of, call it a couple of hundred investors that invest with us. We get the funds committed up front when we go to market trying to raise the capital. So it's not a situation, I know some developers, they'll come up with a project, run their numbers, and then start making phone calls to come up with the equity. We will raise the equity beforehand and call that equity when we have a project that we think is viable. We also have a line of credit with one of the major banks, which allows us to typically put in a no financing contingency offer when we go to purchase an asset. We'll call the equity, we'll tap into our credit line, and then once we own the asset, we'll go to some type of permanent debt. But that gives us a lot of flexibility and gives us a big leg up when we are up against other potential bidders.
So for some of you that have already sat through my presentation, you understand a little bit of what we do, which is unique and rather niche-y. Maybe everybody except for Nick, because he's in Cincinnati, is that, with the Breeze family, we invest and acquire historic properties throughout the country. And when we do that, we're in a number of different sectors, be it hospitality, multifamily, student, senior, a variety of things, office. So as a result, our financing looks different from deal type to deal type. There's cases where we'll go to a PNC or a Fifth Third out of Cincinnati to bring just traditional bank financing. We go to New York and Wall Street a lot to use debt funds, which are far more popular now since the collapse in 2008, 2009. From an equity standpoint, we do use the institutional space a lot, going to life cos along with institutional money. But the other piece that is rather unique to what we do is that with the historic properties that we invest in, we reduce our leverage financing by securitizing the air rights around the historic buildings. I know that's kind of blows a lot of people away, and they're like, what does that actually mean? Be more than happy to talk to you about that separately, but we're able to reduce our debt and actually increase our equity by raising capital in a rather unique way by securitizing these air rights in a city other than New York City. It's a unique piece that was passed as part of the tax code in '76, but it's something that's special that we started here in the Midwest and have been taking down the road for the last 15 years. That really helps round out our capital stack.
You guys, I can wrap it up with the lending since I'm the non-return, non-equity side.
Yeah, so we invest, I guess, out of two buckets. The private equity side, our fund, which is composed of a couple insurance companies, family offices are a growing term. That's, everyone has a different definition, but yeah, usually a family that has 25 million or more of like investable assets, depending on who you talk to, 50 to 100 million are also common numbers. They've kind of emerged as like a real player, and a lot of like the bigger families, call it at 100 million or more, are poaching former bankers or private equity guys and like real investment talent to help them deploy their assets, because they realized you can pay somebody internally a hefty salary and give them incentive to perform a lot and cut down your fees on managers and also get access to managers. So as we're later in the cycle, we were talking about it earlier, there's a ton of capital out there chasing deals, especially in today's like low yield environment. And so, I mean, there's like good managers have more money than they know what to do with. So believe it or not, like investors are trying to court managers, maybe more so than the inverse. Like if you take that back 10 years, managers would take whatever money they could get, and kind of as we're later cycle, the pendulum shifting. And then we also capitalize bigger projects. We'll bring in co-investors like private equity funds or REITs to sit alongside us on things we want to scale up on. And then we use banks on every project or draw on our line of credit to close. So we don't have a financing contingency, which I guess for your knowledge, when sellers sell a property, they want a surety of execution, and financing contingency can be one of the sticky parts of like a purchase offer. So if you come in and have 100% discretionary capital, which equity and or debt, you're a lot more competitive if you get two offers that are the same, but one person has to go raise the money and the other person can demonstrate that they already have the cash and discretion over it. You're probably going to win the deal.
So we typically solve for a 7% return on cost, to your question. Many other metrics, but NOI over cost is what we shoot for. It's those returns getting thinner and thinner. What we're talking about in terms of a capital stack is really no different than someone going out and buying a house. And the bank says, okay, you're buying a $100,000 house. I'll lend you $80,000 or 80%. You bring the other $20,000 or 20%. Now imagine you're building or developing a $10 million apartment building. It's no different. You have to come up with that $10 million through some combination of banks and your own equity. What's happened in our business is sort of a recurring theme in the last 10 years. That $10 million apartment building now costs $50 million because of construction costs and competition and many other factors. So for the first time, really ever in recent years, we find ourselves in joint venture partnerships because the $50 million that you have to solve for is simply too big and too much risk. And a developer of our size does not want to put that same 30%, 35%, whatever the number is, in. So you find partners who are willing to come into the deal with you, and that $50 million becomes a much more complex stack.
Yeah, so I guess we didn't talk about returns. We're a value add player, which means we're buying a problem, fixing it, and then selling it, usually over 3 to 5 years. And for that, we're trying to hit a mid-teens IRR, which is easiest way to think about it is probably double our money in 4 or 5 years is usually the goal.
Before you finish up,
Oh, yep.
you want to do the debt. So one thing that I gotta want to ask the audience real quick, we've talked about a lot of different types of investors that come in and bring money to all the deals that we work on. There's one group that we haven't talked about, which is the largest in our space from a real estate standpoint. Does anybody know what that is? Take a guess. It was mentioned very briefly at the open. Pension funds, okay? I'm sure there's nobody here that fully understands what a pension fund is because it doesn't exist really any longer in as much as a 401k exists today. But pension funds were funds that were set up for people as retirement plans, and some of the largest investors in real estate in the world, be it wherever it may be, are pension funds. And granted, none of us here probably do deals large enough, in the 9 and 10 figures, that pension funds invest in. But it is a player that you should know about if you're going out, into the real estate world, Wall Street, whatever it may be. That pension funds like CalPERS and CalSTRS and Ohio Teachers and so forth, are very large players in the real estate space on the equity side.
Yeah, and I would also say foundations are very big, of course. I don't know if endowments, insurance companies, of course, are investing in that area. So,
I mean, from the debt perspective and from a banker's perspective, you heard a lot of different strategies and philosophies in the way that they line their capital stack up. From my perspective, what we as a lender try to do is there's the traditional part that, the traditional senior debt that's going to have a definition to it. And as, post recessionary time, that has become more disciplined and is safer, and hopefully will extend our time and reduce the depth of any type of downturn that we might have. So there's that simple definition of somewhere between, let's call it, regulatory standpoint, like 85, going above 85% loan to cost is a no-no in terms of how the regulators view it, the cost of capital that comes with it. So that's the maximum. Pre-downturn, that was, like 100% financing, 0 equity in. That was kind of a normal thing. That isn't in the space anymore. But from my perspective, is what we try to do is also be active and be present in some of these other strategies that they have. Nick talked about when, you've got projects, that costs are going up, that equity call that people need, trying to also be present in solving a solution for that, whether it's a line of credit like folks were talking about. In certain cases, and some of you that heard me talk earlier, in urban redevelopment, which was a very prevalent thing happening over the last 10 years, those costs, it's not just an equity gap, it's a cost versus value gap, because it costs a lot more to develop in the urban core than it does in most other places. So something that costs $50 million may only be worth 40, and but the community wants this project to happen. We need to have it happen in the urban core. So how do you fill the $10 million gap? Forget the equity that you got to come up with. You got to fill a $10 million just gap. We've tried to be present in some of the strategies, and some of those strategies have to do in urban core is historic redevelopment, and there are vehicles that are based on historic tax credits and subsidies that come in that are based on preserving historic properties. There's another vehicle, a new market tax credit. It's the same kind of concept, using a tax credit and putting a value to something outside the real estate that allows you to to provide a gap type financing to allow urban redevelopment to flourish when there is a substantial delta between what makes sense and what the value is. So we've tried to find ways to be present in the multi-layers so that we can stay relevant to the developers, so that we can, in our case, we have sometimes set ourselves apart because we can get in, roll our sleeves up, and get involved with multi-layers, be part of the thinking process versus just the senior debt. Because at the senior debt level, there's a lot of us that can play in that space, and we kind of beat each other up because money is one shade of green, and I can't make it look any different. But if there's a multi-layer capital stack and we can somehow value add and solve for and help be a part of the solution, then I can win that game versus just how green is my money.
I have a couple more questions, but I want to kind of turn it over to the audience a little bit. And if you have something that's really, on your mind as it relates to commercial real estate or different areas, I'd like to turn it over to the audience to see if anybody has a question that they would like to ask our panelists. And hopefully you've maybe thought of something. If not, I can go back to mine. But anybody have any questions that they would like to ask the panelists to have them go through? Up there, if you can just speak loudly.
So it seems like every summer, big cities are getting more and more interns flooding in just for the 3 months at a time. But I feel like every summer it becomes harder and harder to find internship housing. Is there anything that is going on your side of the table to work on that?
Again, with having 2 kids that have gone through this already and trying to find them housing in Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, really what you're finding is the student housing, student housing's taking advantage of this. If you probably don't know this, but if you really focus on the lease that you sign, it's a 12-month lease. And either you're accelerating it over 9 months or you're paying for months you don't live there. So really what's happening is that the landlords are then using those excess months, if they're in the urban core, to then rent to people that are coming in for internships. And so if you're, basically, so the owners are kind of getting paid twice for the same unit. Good for them, nothing wrong with that. But it's a temporary space. I know there's corporate and furnished housing that used to be a space back in the day with a group called Oakwood that still exists out there. But I think short-term housing, Airbnb we talked about, those are really where alternative housings are kind of going to. There are some facilities that do offer month-to-month, but it's extremely expensive to live that way. But I don't see anybody that I've heard of that are looking to go into that space because, again, it's transitional. Anytime that you have a large transitional component of anything in real estate, it's rather expensive.
Yeah. I think one of the areas that you're seeing some are other universities who are opening up their dorms to students who are coming to work in different cities where they do have the university. So that would be one thing I would check. If a company's not providing housing for you for a summer internship, look to all the different universities or colleges in the area. And a lot of times they're renting their dorms out to those interns, as an example.
I know, in many cases, in the locations that we have internships, we've developed a relationship with a local university because it is the only way that somehow or another a larger block of housing ends up, open and available. It's a difficult process. Now, I've heard, but I have not confirmed, that in certain training aspects and attraction and retention, I've heard that some of the accounting firms are actually developing housing and almost like hospitality type units.
Their own university.
Yes, and
Pricewaterhouse, PwC has
Right.
a university.
and
EY has a university.
and it's become a selling point because it's like, hey, come here to the mini accounting campus, and it's a way for them, because they can't solve the problem, to get an influx of kids in. To what are you going to do? Well, we'll just make it a campus, and it's become something that's been worth the investment. And they're a little bit unique because they have such a tremendous volume of new hires that they have to bring in and interns that they have to attract in order to feed the beast, that they can do that a little bit more than most organizations that just aren't going to bring in hundreds and hundreds every cycle. So.
We actually house our interns in our own buildings, as I'm sure North American would do. Obviously, you're in a multifamily space, you use your own facilities first.
Right. Good question. I think where there's demand, there is a solution. You might be surprised, even market rate multifamily housing, your normal apartment housing, non-student housing, we often allow short-term leases. It depends on what our exposure happens to be. You oftentimes pay a premium, but it's not unusual to see leases at our company and many others that would be of a term other than 12 months. We prefer a more stable long-term lease, but for a premium, there might be options available. We generally prohibit subletting or subleasing for the reasons that security and other things.
Anybody else have a question? Here we go, over here.
I know that agents usually have work weeks that exceed the 48 hours. Do you guys also have like long work weeks that you have to work with staff casual?
Yeah, I can't tell you the last time I worked a 40-hour week and I mean, the joke is, how many emails will he send on vacation?
Yeah.
Especially on the owner's side. Tenants' issues are our issues. I mean, I didn't think I was going to get into divorce counseling, bankruptcy, spousal cheating, but when you own the center and that's what happens, that kind of rolls uphill to preserve your asset. So, and it's a pretty entrepreneurial business. I think, a lot of us, you kind of get into it, well, you get what you put into it. And so, our analysts has maybe a more normal 50 to 60 hour week, we're not expecting them. But when something goes awry or when there's a live deal, which everyone is usually juggling multiple live deals, we do what it takes to get it done. And sometimes that means some longer hours.
So from my standpoint, I would say to you that, we come back to, and some people have heard me talk about efficiency, is that in our environment, in the workplaces that I've always been in, if you can do your job in a short period of time, we don't care. That's fine. It's a question of do your job, do as much as you can in the period of time that you have. And if that takes somebody 35 hours or 55 hours, that's up to you. It's purely just that. In this environment where people are spending less time in the office and more time in, let's call them satellite offices, really people aren't counting hours as much as they once did. But what I will say, again, from a person that ended up working at a bank and going to graduate school to get my MBA, work as hard as you can early in life. It's a lot easier than when it's later in life, right? When you have kids and you have other responsibilities and other things that are going on. So if I had to work 60-hour weeks early in life versus You know, when I'm 50, yeah, I'd much rather do that. So it goes back to, you know, people asked me today about internships and paying your dues. And I would say, you know, go through the motions, do what you need to do, work hard, take advantage of the time that you have, because eventually it will go away. And so, you know, but again, my belief is you do your job and you do it as best as you can in whatever time frame you're able to offer.
There's a saying in our business, it's been around the 30-plus years I've been in the business, and that is that time kills deals. And what that means is that you really need to show a sense of urgency if you want to get something done in a timely fashion. It's very easy for a potential buyer of a property of yours to change his mind or get cold feet. And I can't tell you the number of times, particularly in my Macy days, where I had to stay late with my attorney responding to a document, just trying to get a document turned around that night rather than the next morning, just knowing that we don't have the luxury of time here. We've got to strike while the iron is hot here, and if that means hanging around the office to get something done rather than waiting overnight, you're going to do it.
I mean, coming from the banker that, you know, it's laughable, the 9-to-5 banker. I haven't worked 9 to 5 ever. It doesn't exist. Time is of the essence. Delivery for your client is key, and you have to do that on their time frame, not yours. The other thing that I would tell you, in my seat, not only do my clients and the responsibilities that I have to serving them under whatever circumstances that is, I also have a corporate responsibility. As a bank, as a financial institution, we have a corporate responsibility within the Cincinnati community. And many of us in the business development field take that very seriously. So that means that we're involved. You know, we do things like this to give back to our educational partners. So we come out, we represent, we encourage, we do those things. You know, I'm involved with 4 different nonprofits on their boards and serve, you know, in leadership capacities on committees, fundraising. As a corporate citizen, we are involved with a lot of things beyond my own nonprofits, but we are out in the community supporting those efforts, making sure that we're present as a good corporate citizen. Those are all things that you work, you know, the quote 9 to 5, and then, you know, probably on average, 2 to 4 nights a week, I'm doing something after hours. And it gets doubled. My husband heads up corporate banking for us. So between the two of us, we can be at a rubber chicken dinner every single night of the year if we so choose. Now, that's part of a work-life balance and making sure that we don't do that. But you know, it's something, you know, I joked with the group earlier, you know, this morning. I pulled one all-nighter here at Miami. I never thought that that would be a part of my professional career, but I literally pulled an all-nighter to close a deal. It was a very complicated capital stack, and you know, I'll never forget, my boss walked in the next morning, looked at me, and said, "Holy shit, you look like crap, and you're wearing the same thing that you were wearing yesterday." And I looked at him and I said, "Give me 3 more hours. This thing is gonna finally be closed, and I will go home. I will shower, and you won't see me for a good 24 to 48 hours after that." But that's what it took. I mean, and we just you just get it done. Yeah, it was an interesting walk of shame, but we got it done. So.
This kind of, you know, what they're answering right now kind of leads me into my last question for them. What advice would you give to the students here? They all come or have different majors, some of them double majors, and I know a lot of you have, I heard accounting, I heard finance, I heard economics, double major in analytics. Give them some advice, I guess, how they might enter the real estate marketplace, not only from maybe what they're doing academically, but should they look at certifications like Argus Financial Modeling? Should they look at workshops from some of like the SIORs of the world to kind of really look to enter the real estate space that might make them stand out amongst the real estate companies looking to employ them?
My degree is in finance. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier. I would have 2 really quick pieces of advice. one is cliche, the other not so much. Bring passion to whatever it is you pursue. You're going, this will not be probably not the first time, will not be the last time, but it is very real. And two, particularly as it relates to real estate, numbers run through much of what we do. So if numbers in whatever form is not part of your pursuit, but you think real estate might be, I would encourage you to pair that with math.
Yeah, I think both of those are great advice, and maybe from another another angle, learn how to sell. And sales does not mean like making someone buy a used car that they don't want. Whether you're managing your boss and you're the analyst, I mean, you're always making a sale. And I mean, that's from everything in the workplace to your home environment. But learning to persuade and effectively communicate is becoming like a dying art. And most people, especially in real estate, because there's always a human on the other side of the transaction, you can climb the ladder quicker and keep moving up. And there's a million good schools that are going to teach numbers, or there's a lot of passion out there, but one of the biggest differentiators is like communication, presentation, and sales skills.
And I would say on feeding right off of that, networking. Network in every capacity that you can starting now on this campus. If you get the opportunity to meet an individual, make sure you keep that card, make sure you keep their contact information. Always be thinking, put yourself in a position whenever you can to be in a professional environment early and learn and be comfortable in selling and working a room and creating within your academic environment now, and then when you're out in the workplace. Networking is not just external, networking is internal to your organization as well. You will make your life significantly more simple, especially the larger your organization, if you create and you develop an internal network as well as an external, because no matter what the problem is, I'm 2 calls away from solving it if I've created the right internal network. And for my clients, I owe them that. I owe them the ability to, within 1 or 2 phone calls, be able to solve whatever their problem is. And that comes down to networking. And sometimes, it's not just knowing who to call, it's knowing what is their personality. How are you going to get them to move at lightning speed for you? It comes down to, kissing some butt and making sure that you understand the personality on the other side of the phone so that you can get something done. And that is as important internally as it is sometimes externally. And it all comes down to selling. You're selling yourself, you're selling the product, you're selling the process, whatever it is. Get yourself outside of your comfort zone early, and it will make your life so much easier no matter what you do in life.
So for me, I have an entire slide on this in the presentation that I've been doing today and we'll do tomorrow. So I'll just touch upon a few things. First is, don't be afraid to stretch yourself into something. I use the example, tells these stories of my parents offering for me to go to Luxembourg. And I didn't know anything about Lux, back in at that time, 88, 87, and I passed on it. And that was a mistake, because I didn't want to stretch myself. Whereas now, with my kids and people that I look to hire, I consider that to be a requirement. And I know I've asked some people here at Farmers, and I'm not sure if it's a huge priority, but to me, studying abroad and finding a way to structure your schedule in a manner where you're able to go out and have those unique and special experiences are important. Another example about stretching that I tend to use is, anybody know before Excel came out what the spreadsheet program that people use? I know on the panel will know, but anybody out there, somebody's got to know. Even after that, but more popular than that. But don't yell, because again, you're of our age. But right before Excel, back there in the blue. You're laughing. We actually all, I don't know about you, I had a typewriter. So I worked in the computer lab here. So we had computer labs at Miami, and I actually made money between working at Skippers and TopTech. I worked at the computer lab, which was open 24/7, and you had to do papers and spreadsheets, you would go there. But it was called Lotus, was the name of the program before Excel. So I, working in the computer center, knew Lotus. I almost could be a teacher of Lotus. So when I got offered a job at at a capital markets group, they said, so you know how to work Excel? That's what we're using. I'm like, absolutely, no problem. I know it like the back of my hand. And it was a Wednesday. I have never used Excel in my entire life. Okay, but I told them I could. I went out and bought a book, and by Monday, when I started, I was able to utilize it and work my way into a job there. I was there for 7 years. One other thing I'll leave you with is when we were here and we were looking for our careers. I know in the accounting department, and that was my major, they would have a book, kind of a catalog of everybody's resume that they would send out to every company imaginable because we didn't have the internet and things of that nature. So they'd send it out to companies so if they saw your name or if they saw something interested, they could go to this big book and pull out your resume. Well, so you had to deliver something like 500 resumes to the career office so they could piece together this big catalog. So what I did, being a little bit different, and it caused some anxiety and some grief, was that I delivered 500 gray resumes. So when it went into this book, if you looked at the side of it, one would just stick out. White, 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 ivory, gray. And so it got people to see my resume and call me. It's like, what are you doing? Why is this here? And it was different. It wasn't pink or anything, but it was different. And so, it was standing out, which I consider to be important, to make yourself different, create value, make sure that you have value, and also protect that value. I think you guys have probably all learned about intellectual property. And that means for you individually also, create value at a company, try to maintain that value, protect that value as best as you can. And again, I can't push as what's been said here about selling. Everybody sells. Don't be fooled about it. I don't care what job you're in, inside, outside, everybody's selling to somebody.
If you can make it quick, Carl, I was told there's 250 other students looking to come in here as well for a meeting that they have. So, and then one quick thing before he responds is that we are having a reception over in the lobby. We have 20 La Rosa's pizzas, like 8 dozen Insomnia cookies and other refreshments to network with our executives. So I'm going to let...
I will say one more thing and we'll get out of here. If you have the ability, if you have the opportunity to do somebody in the business a favor to help make their life easier, do it.
Yep.
This is a relationship-driven business. And that person that you do the favor for, someday you're going to need something. And that person is going to be the resource for you to do something. And they're going to be a lot more available to you, shall we say, if they remember that you did something for them.
All right, thanks, everybody.